Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
Hi, Phil.
Well, hello, Sandy.
You know, this morning you asked me if you should wear one of your Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah.
And I said no.
Right.
I said, I like what you have on, and I'm wearing the plain black with a little yellow and orange CCAR colors here on my necklace.
Is that a Kenya necklace?
It is. Sammy brought it back for me.
Sammy's back in Kenya now.
She is. But let's stay with the Hawaiian shirt thing.
What? I'm going to get sad.
I'm glad that you didn't wear your Hawaiian shirt today, because our guest has on one, and I think that we would have clashed a little bit. It's subdued for you.
It is, but I do like it. I'd wear it.
Good. Subdued is not a bad thing.
So our guest is Don Fertman. Don, you want to say hello?
Hello.
Hi,
you
Don.
said that like with a real radio voice.
That's from my old radio days.
You were on the radio?
I was on the radio for like 10 years.
Where and what station?
WNHU at University of New Haven, 88.7 on your FM dial. Mm-hmm. And I was actually one of the founders of the radio station. I helped build the radio station from the ground up. We went on the air on June 4th, 1973, and I was, one of the first DJs. I was the program director. I was the music director, and I was on the air even after I graduated for 10 years, up until the 10-year anniversary of WNHU, which turned out to be my crash and burn, because I'm a person who is in long-term recovery, believe it or not.
I do believe
from alcoholism, and because that tends to be a theme, and somehow the anniversary of the radio station coincided with the anniversary of the beginning of my recovery. Let's put it that way.
Wow.
So that was, what year was that? Your recovery started, 83 then?
83, right,
Wow.
on the 10-year anniversary. So I'm a
Wow.
person in long-term recovery, which means I haven't had a drink or a drug since June 6th, 1983.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's quite the run.
Congratulations.
Continue.
To me. Yeah.
Continue.
And your tenure as a DJ was some pretty amazing music coming out during those decades.
Yeah.
That decade.
No, the 70s. I've already told you about this. The 70s was the decade of music. The 80s,
All right.
not so much.
This is why I'm a better listener on the podcast.
What?
He started DJing in 1973.
I know, he got out in 83 because the music stunk.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's the thing about music, right? It's an individual taste.
We don't share.
Well, here's the other
taste.
thing. I was in a rock and roll band from the mid-'70s to 1981, 82, thereabouts. And it was right when punk and new wave were happening.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm a big fan of new wave. So that was one of the good things that came out of the 80s.
Debatable.
Like when you get into, you're not a punk fan. What do you think about the Ramones, Phil?
I like them. I was saying the new wave and some of the stuff was a little out there for me. But see, Sandy's a little more tempered. She's like the yacht rock radio type person.
Yacht rock. I'm more of an R&B blended with country,
All right.
with a dash of pop.
Oh, you actually described that like you put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah, we had a lot of car rides recently, long car rides with your musical taste. If he really wants to provoke me, he puts Grateful Dead on.
Oh, so you're a Deadhead, Phil.
Not so much at the time, but more recently that I watched the documentary, rekindled my interest, and just really took a new interest into listening to how they played and how everything fit together, and am kind of fascinated by the brilliance of it all.
Are you into Joe Russo's Almost Dead?
No. I don't even know what that is.
Actually, they just sold out. There's the new, here in Connecticut, we have various musical venues, and they just sold out what used to be the tennis stadium in New Haven. Now they've turned it into a concert venue, and these guys sold it out for 6 nights. And what they are is they're a band that does Grateful Dead and Grateful Dead-oriented music.
Well, does the lead
people love these guys.
Yeah, but does the lead guitarist have all his fingers?
Unfortunately, he does, so it's just not quite as pure.
Right, I agree.
As, Jerry and his missing middle finger.
Yeah, look at Don. He's like, what?
So what was the name of your band?
I was in a band called the Crayons.
The Crayons.
Yeah, we were colorful, new wave rock. And I was the orange crayon, which meant I had orange hair, and back in those days, a lot of it. Mm-hmm. I had orange clothes. I drove an orange Volkswagen Rabbit, and I lived in Orange, Connecticut.
Come on.
That was a requirement.
And did the Crayons ever have a big hit or anything? Or
we actually got local airplay with a single called Cinderella Lovely.
We're going to have to check that out on the way home.
It was
today.
on FM Future Music, which also featured some other local legends, Jasper Rath and Eyes and a few others.
NRBQ?
Pardon me?
NRBQ?
NRBQ were not on FM Future Music,
okay.
But they were local legends.
Yes.
And still are.
Yeah.
They're still going.
Mm-hmm. Good old Al.
Yeah.
Yep.
Big Al Anderson.
So did you grow up in southwestern Connecticut?
I grew up born in Delaware, grew up mostly in Connecticut in the Bridgeport, West Haven area. Mm-hmm. I alternated between those two, but I lived in practically every town in Connecticut at some point in my life. My dad was, here's the story part, right? My dad was an active alcoholic, as was my mom, and so my dad would switch jobs every 2 years. I don't think voluntarily. Mm-hmm. And so every time he switched jobs, we'd move to a new town. So we moved to a lot of towns. So I lived along the shoreline. I lived in Bridgeport, West, all those places. And, it was kind of a rolling stone, so to speak, just wandering around. Not
Siblings?
An actual rolling
Do you have
stone,
a lot
but
of
I was. Yeah.
brothers and sisters?
One brother.
brother.
I got a little brother, Steve. He's about 6.5 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. And he had, had a whole different experience of growing up than I did. He was not affected by alcoholism. He didn't get into drugs and alcohol, whereas I took to it like a duck takes to...
like an orange crayon
like a
to
duck,
paper.
Like a duck takes to orange sauce. I don't know.
Oh, my God. Oh, that was good. There's 169 towns in Connecticut. Is that right? 169? That's a lot of towns.
It's interesting you say that because my wife and I just went through trying to name every town in Connecticut.
You can't.
We got to 130. We
You
did.
Wow.
But
That's amazing.
Some of them
obscure.
didn't count, though, because, like we said, like Devon and Woodmont, which are actually suburbs of Milford. Yeah. They're not actual towns, so they actually don't count.
Like Simsbury has one that we go through.
Well, I grew up in Windsor, so we have Pequannock, Hayden Station, Wilson, and Windsor proper.
And those aren't real towns, but those are part of Windsor.
Yeah, they're villages within the town.
Oh my gosh.
Villages, that's what they're called.
But we're so complicated.
See, I just learned something.
Yeah, that's so complicated.
We live in the city with village charm now, Manchester, Connecticut.
Well, that's where I was born.
Yes.
Yeah, I lived outside of Manchester for all of 3 years, probably, or 4, when we were in Ellington, right? In Rockville. So I haven't moved too far.
I've moved in so many different... I also lived in Florida for 4 years. I grew up... I reached puberty in Florida. From my mom finally left my dad, and we moved down to Florida. My little brother and I went down with my mom to Pompano Beach, Florida. That's near Fort Lauderdale. And we lived there as I said, for 4 years, very confusing time in life, going through, the hormones and all the stuff that happens, and living with my crazy alcoholic mom, who I love dearly and who did get sober, I'll mention. It was a time in my life that it affected me in a lot of very strange ways. One of the things that would happen is that my mom would come home from the bars late at night. She was a single woman, and she'd be out drinking. She'd come in about 2 a.m. I was in junior high school. She'd come into my room. She'd shake me awake, bring me out to the living room, sit me down, and for 2 hours regale me with stories about what a miserable SOB my father was. And so I'd go to school later that morning, disheveled and tired and dressed very weirdly because she wanted me to dress in a particular way. And
what's a weird way?
Maybe like this. I don't
No, that's just like, what could be weird? So you were like 12, 13, something like
Middle
that?
school Hawaiian shirts.
Imagine that you're in, here you are, you're a 13-year-old kid. And you're going to junior high school, and your mom dresses you in corduroy pants. Now you're in Florida.
In Florida.
Corduroy pants that were white and blue and black swirlies all over the pants. And she sent me to school in those. And the only thing that kept me from getting laughed out of school was the fact that under my arm when I went to school, I had Disraeli Gears by Cream. I had The Doors' Strange Days. I had Jefferson Airplane After Bathing at Baxter's. And I had maybe even a Grateful Dead album, maybe even Live Dead.
Yeah.
But I had these 4 albums under my arm, and that's the only thing that made me cool. Other than that, I was like a nerdy, geeky kid.
So you had already bounced around all these schools in Connecticut, and now you're bounced into Florida in those circumstances. I don't know why you got involved with alcohol down there.
Yeah,
I'm fascinated though that you knew that carrying those albums was that like a protection
Security
thing for
blanket.
you, or what? How did you? Or were you just carrying them?
I was just carrying them. I did not know that I was cool. I know that I heard I was into the Monkees. I have to be very honest.
Yeah.
But I still, to this day, consider the Monkees to be one of the great rock and roll groups of all time. I love the Monkees.
I'm not going to argue with you.
And so
They're on my playlist.
I grew up with the Monkees, and then my dad came down to visit us in Florida, and he brought me my first stereo. And it was a Sears portable stereo. It was green, and it had the turntable would fold up like this, and you'd pull the turntable down, and you disconnect. There was one speaker in the main box, and then you disconnect the other speaker and put it over here, and now you have stereo.
Yeah.
And the album he gave me, my first album to go with it, was the soundtrack to Dr. Dolittle. Not the Eddie Murphy version, the Rex Harrison version, the original Dr. Dolittle film. And, it was If I Could Talk to the Animals, and I'm listening to this, I'm like, well, it's not the Monkees. But he said, well, let's go to the store and get an album that you might like.
Yeah.
And what did I get? Sgt. Pepper's.
Oh.
I have that.
And
you got the Beatles version. I have the Bee Gees version.
No.
Bee Gees.
Sorry.
I look, the first 5 Bee Gees albums I love dearly.
Right.
Then they got into
Yeah,
staying alive, but anyway, it was like
Sgt. Pepper.
oh, it's Sgt. Pepper's, and all of a sudden like the voices are over here and the drums are over there, and like things would go back and forth. And so I said, what else? Oh, I remember what the 4th album was. It was not Grateful Dead. It was Jimi Hendrix. Axis, Bold as Love. Jimi Hendrix Experience.
My first album was Jimi Hendrix Experience.
The first album?
It was 72 or 73, and I got my first stereo, and he would play that song, and the guitar would go from one speaker to the other, and I had never heard anything so cool in my entire life.
Exactly. That is it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about as you described that, I think about the power of music.
Right.
Yeah.
And, this is Recovery Matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to recovery and music, how those things tie together.
Yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, can I tell a little music story?
I'd love it.
That comes to mind as I say this. I was 9 months sober. I was newly sober, and a friend of mine who also got sober, he and we drank and drugged our way through college at University of New Haven. And he had gone out to California, and he had found God. He found God through Jesus Christ, and became a born-again Christian, and got sober as a result of a direct linkage to his higher power. And he was getting married, and I hadn't seen him since he moved out to California. But a friend of mine called and said, "Oh, yeah, Bill's getting married, and why don't you come out and surprise him?" So here I am, 9 months sober, and so at the end of the workday on Friday, I got a red eye, and I flew out to California to surprise my friend Bill. But while I'm on the plane, now, I'm excited, I'm scared, I'm on an airplane for the first time since I got sober. I'm, I don't know where I'm going in my life. I don't know where I'm going in my job. Like a lot of uncertainty in my life. And at the same time, my whole life at that point revolved around basically three things. I'd go to work, I'd eat dinner, I'd go to a meeting. A meeting of a 12-step group, an anonymous 12-step group. So I do those three things, and that was basically my whole life. It was like work, meeting, and dinner. And so now I'm on my way to California, and I've been doing nothing but reading, AA literature and focusing on my recovery, and I'm listening to, I've got my Walkman, which was a thing that had a thing called cassettes.
Yeah.
And I had a cassette in there, and I'm listening to my Walkman. I got my headphones on. I'm on the plane. I'm looking out the window, and one of my very favorite bands is the Beach Boys. And there's an album they did called Surf's Up, a wonderful album. They're doing a box set on that that's coming out at the end of next month. Sounds like a commercial plug. And the song comes on called Long Promised Road.
Wow.
And it's one of the most spiritual songs. The lyrics are very spiritual. And I'm listening to the song, and Carl Wilson sings, So real the pain of growing in soul, of climbing up to reality's goal. And I started to cry.
Yeah.
And the song just like hit me, and it's all about like throwing off the shackles that are binding me down. And that's what I was doing. I was trying to grow in soul, but it was painful. Early sobriety can be painful because I didn't have my go-to anymore. I didn't have my beloved bottle of Majorska vodka. And so I was working so hard to grow in soul. And the power of music, just the way, the melody in his voice and those lyrics hit me. And it's true, there are a number of songs that I can't listen to today without, the waterworks start.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's one of yours, Phil?
Well, there's some Christian based ones, and one was actually on the Appalachian Trail about Never Alone, and it's really about a song by Matt Redman talking about and another one is Abide With Me. And it hit me at a right time where I would just start to weep. Another one was by Casting Crowns, which was called Life Song, and Let My Life Song Sing to You. And I was reflecting on the trail, probably like 20 plus years in recovery, and wondering, you know, all my work in recovery and with CCAR and my family, and now I'm going to get choked up, has my song sung to you, which is what the song, Let My Life Song Sing to you, God. And that's like, how do you live your life so deeply and so spiritually that it's really a song to God? And every time I heard that song, I'd just start weeping. And I'd have my earbuds sometimes in, and Paradox would go, are you listening to that song again? And I'd be like, you can't help it. I can't help it. And then another time, music connected my past, my addiction past with my recovery. Was probably 3-4 years in recovery. Back at UConn, I drank and drugged my way through UConn. I found a lot of music, though.
Speaking of music,
it had to show up, right? It just had to show up.
At the seaside.
I listened to a lot of Steely Dan, like just stoned and drunk out of my mind. And so when I got into recovery, I kind of switched my music because it was like a new life, and I didn't associate with, like, that was my past life. And in 3-4 years in recovery, I bought a new CD. CDs had just come out instead of the albums, so I bought Katie Lied by Steely Dan. And I put it in our big stereo, I had big speakers in my living room and all that. And the music just overwhelmed me because it was so beautiful. And I realized that everything in my past was not bad. You know, because I almost had like this demarcation that before my recovery date, that was all bad. And now everything's going to be good. And this music bridged the gap and helped me to see that I really started to embrace that I was still the same person. I had a disease that caused some bad behavior, if you will, but I wasn't bad. And that one album, Steely Dan, Katie Lie, did that for me.
Wow.
That kind of thing.
And how about you, Sandy?
Yeah, I mean, music is how I connected with my higher power. And the thing that comes to mind is when Phil was going through stage 4 cancer treatment, that this album by Michael W. Smith filled with songs that I would listen to daily, but one was Healing Rain. And he didn't know that I was listening to this album, or he wasn't completely all together. And we had a drive to the emergency room that was an hour and 20 minutes, and I played that song for him, and so it became something that really connected us.
Mm-hmm.
But
you used to talk about your past, though, where you found comfort in music on your...
Oh, yeah. Well, so I grew up youngest of 5, 14 years after the 4 kids, so they were all out of the house, and I was left behind with parents whose values didn't mirror ones that I aspired to. So I would lay down in the dining room where the stereo was. I would lay down every night in the dark on the floor just listening to my albums, escaping into the stories that the songs provided to escape my life, because they wouldn't let me, they had a lot of rules, so I certainly wasn't spending a lot of time out of their care. But I could escape in the music, in that quiet and in that darkness.
And today, Don, Sandy and I we've raised 4 kids together. The last one's still in the house, and we spent a lot of time on Sundays in church. You know, that was kind of a thing, and there were a lot of reasons, but we don't attend church regularly anymore, if at all, in the last. But what we have found is that if we drive to visit my dad in Rhode Island every Sunday morning and either put on like Christian praise music or country Christian music or whatever, that it helps us connect and rekindled our marriage in a lot of ways. Music is so prevalent in so many ways. And what's it like for you today?
You know, that's so true that music continues to be a theme. So here's another story that just happened 2 nights ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was hosting a men's spiritual group at my house. I remember this group, and we go to each other's houses and do this periodically. And my sponsor was there. And my sponsor is someone who I love dearly. And my sponsor is not going to be on this planet very much longer. He's getting ready for the great journey to whatever comes next. Mm-hmm. And he knows it, and we all know it. Mm-hmm. And so we had about 21 men in my backyard. And there was a 19-year-old luthier there. Speaking of luthiers, because we got Don over here, who was also.
And what is a luthier?
Somebody who builds guitars. Right? Does that sound about right? And so he was brought along by his grandfather, who was a member of this group, and my sponsor's son was also there visiting from California. He's a musician, and I've been known to dabble in music, so. I had told him about this custom guitar I had down in the basement, and he was interested in seeing it. So first of all, the meeting itself was beautiful because we talked about spiritual experiences, and we shared our spiritual experiences, different experiences that each of us have had, the majority of whom are in recovery, the folks at this meeting. And that was, and you could see my sponsor, Paul, just like taking all this in. And then my sponsor's son, whose name is Jonathan, and this luthier, whose name is Nico, and I went down to the basement when everything was over and guys were leaving, and I showed him the guitar. So he picked up the guitar and he started futzing around with it. So I said, oh, here, it was already plugged in. I turned on the amp. And then I picked up my bass, and then Jonathan went behind the drums, and we started to play. We just were jamming on some blues, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, blues and E. So we just started to play. And then we switched off, then I gave Jonathan, who was primarily a bass player, the bass, and I went behind the drums, and we played again, and Paul, my sponsor, came downstairs, which isn't easy for him to do, and because I have a little studio down there, kind of about this big, and we were playing, and he looked in, and you could just see the look on. He was just beaming, just watching us play, and watching this kid. He was a great guitarist. This kid, wailing on the guitar, and he's watching his son play, which he never gets to see. I'm playing, it's, and I've talked about my music career over the years, but he never actually saw me play. So we're all playing.
Oh, wow.
And I could just see what that meant to him, to my sponsor, just being able to take that in. And so that, once again, was, the power of music and how it brought this little group of people together, just jamming on the blues.
It's so powerful. Just briefly, one of my sisters was passing 4 days in the hospital, and we were playing all her favorite music over the course of the 4 days. She's in a coma.
And what are some of the artists? I always find that fascinating.
Engelbert Humperdinck.
No,
Tom Jones.
Me, let me go.
Karen Carpenter.
Beautiful voice.
But her oldest grandchild, who was probably 16 at the time, on the 4th day, came in and played this song called Set Afire. He really felt called to come in and play that for her, and she passed away during that song. And, those 4 days were really meaningful, the songs that she had loved in her life. But this song was a faith-based song, and it's ultimately how she was called home. So power of music is just extraordinary.
I think as a recovery tool, that I find that times when out of sorts a lot of ways, or even sad, or I guess I get depressed, but it's not a deep depression. Once in a while might get sad or melancholy. But if I am in like a vehicle, let's say, that has a good sound system, and now you can just plug in your phone and Spotify, which is like a long way from the Walkman and cassettes, right? Or carrying the albums under your arm.
Because you got everything.
And you just hit a song, and the energy of how it shifts your entire emotional state is extraordinary. And when you pay attention to that, why wouldn't we be listening to music? Why do we revel in these moods or these attitudes when you could just probably listen to a song or a series of songs that you probably know that would change your entire outlook? Sometimes we just like to sit in our own poo, if you will. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, the pity pot, I think we would call that sometimes.
Right. Or put it, well, if I want to sit in it, I'll just play Neil Young over and over again and feed that.
I totally get that. And on a related note, I know that you...
Related note?
We had... I know you had Scott Strode as a guest recently.
Yeah.
And Scott, he's the executive director of the Phoenix, and I'm the chairman of the board of the Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we're doing is we're branching out into music.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if Scott talked about that, but
a little bit.
But that's, for me, that's something I'm really behind, and I'm really hoping that takes on a life of its own because of that very reason, that music and recovery are so intertwined, I believe, and that music just has that, what is it, music has the power to charm the savage breast or whatever. Mm-hmm. That savage breast that I brought in here was my addiction. And you're right, it changes one's outlook. It has certainly done that for me. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned that idea of you took music, from your previous life, right, your pre-recovery life, and oh no, that has to go on the shelf.
Right.
I came back from rehab, and I walked into my living room, and there's my guitar sitting there. And I took that guitar and I put it in the closet because I thought sex and drugs and rock and roll, that's all over. Right. I'm never going to play guitar again. Mm-hmm. But then after a period of time, I was feeling the need to play something. Once you've listened to music, you want to continue to listen to music. Once you've played music, you want to keep playing music. So I went out and bought a piano because I figured, that won't get me into trouble.
Can't put that in the closet.
I never played the piano before. So I went to Macy's in New York, and I bought an upright piano just to learn how to play. So I sat and figured out how to make chords and that kind of stuff. But it was that idea that music, was my music career had to be behind me because now I'm sober. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, my whole life at that point was revolving around meetings, dinner, work.
Right.
That was my whole life. And I had not developed yet the ability to start socially interacting with people sober, in a sober manner. And I didn't know how to do it. I was one of those guys that when it came to meetings, I would show up right when the meeting was started, and as soon as the Our Father was done, I was out the door. Mm-hmm. So you didn't get to know me. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't conceive of at the time was, imagine if there were a network of sober musicians that I could go play with. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could play again because I wouldn't feel like I'm being drawn back to the bars or I'm being drawn back to the old crowd. I have an opportunity to actually play music with other sober people and connect with each other. And that's exactly what we're doing at the Phoenix.
Perfect.
We're starting to bring that together.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Were you able to do it back in your early recovery?
It was a long time, and my friend Bill, who had moved to California, he moved back to Connecticut to plant a church. His church is the Vineyard Church, and he had started one in New Haven. And when he moved back, we actually got together and said, hey, why don't we play a little bit? And we got a couple of other friends, and we started, us sober guys started playing together, and we got the chance to do that.
Yeah.
And then after that, I played on and off with some of my old Crayon guys, and yeah.
My old
crayons.
Yeah, the old Crayon guys. Yeah, I got together with Green and Chartreuse, and
You guys are inspiring me because I left my comfort dancing, like whatever kind of dancing, behind in my addiction because I was the most excellent dancer when I was drunk. I got to find a way to let that back into my life. Yeah.
we have to start that then. We have to start the Phoenix dance.
There you go.
It's physical, too.
I think a lot about CCAR and music, and there's been opportunities, and Don's in here, and we have other musicians, and yeah, what is the role of that? It's really, and I just saw something on social media, too, about we're not paying enough attention to the power of music. We're just not doing it. And it's very individualized, but we don't make a concerted effort. Even here, like when I train the Recovery Coach Academy, I always put music in the beginning when people are coming into the classroom, whether it's virtual or in person, at every break, when people leave. And they notice that right away because even in a training or a classroom, it sets a completely different atmosphere. That if you walked into a classroom with music playing, you'll have a whole different experience than if it's dead silence.
I think you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of the Beach Boys, only because I spoke of them a while
yeah,
back.
Speaking of the Beach Boys, there's a tangent. All right.
There's a song called Add Some Music to Your Day.
Yeah.
It's on their album called Sunflower.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend listening to that music or that song because it espouses exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how music, when you add it to your day, and it describes a whole bunch of different ways to add it from the dentist's chair to hearing it faintly in the distance when you're on the phone. How when music is added to your day, it just does that much more for you.
So you've been in recovery since 83, so I'm thinking that's got to be
when I graduated high school.
It's got to be like something like I got like 38 years or something like that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier that I got into recovery when I was 28 and you were 29, which was pretty young at that time. So over those decades of recovery, have you always been playing an instrument? Would you say mostly all the way through? And I do want to talk a little bit about your career and your television appearance and all that kind of stuff, because that was a big moment for the recovery in a lot of ways too. But was music involved some way throughout all of that?
Once I got that piano, I started to get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to let go of music once it's part of you.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was always listening to music. I never stopped that.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came to playing, eventually that guitar came out of the closet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when I got together with, a few of my sober friends and started to play, I tried to do that as much as I could. Honestly, I hadn't played in a couple of years. Things have just been very busy in my life, and which is funny because I just retired in January,
yeah.
Yet somehow I'm busier than ever.
Yeah.
And as a result, I just didn't have a chance to play. But when I picked up the bass just 2 nights ago,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I played it yesterday. It's like the
connection.
bicycle
Muscle
thing,
memory,
right? Yeah,
right?
just it all comes back.
Wow. Well, I was thinking about picking that bass up or the guitar out of the closet, and our friend Arno, that he was in his using days was a fantastic saxophonist. He could play all those instruments. And he had put it away for a while, and we were away on a spiritual retreat and learning about how often he played, and he hadn't picked it up since, really. So
Well, he had been in a plane crash where his father-in-law died, so
Wow.
he hadn't picked it up
and he was
since
the
that time.
he was the pilot, and so we encouraged him to a small plane off the Cape back in, I think it was '75 actually, or something like that. But he picked his saxophone up again, and he's played at the Lord's Prayer at most of our recovery walks ever since. It's just beautiful rendition, and so he incorporated music too back into his life. It's kind of a theme we've got going here that was completely unplanned, as usual.
It's beautiful.
All right. So many years ago, there was an episode on a television show. Would you be so kind to talk to us about that and how?
Sure.
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite shows, especially because I spent over 3 decades in corporate America, and so I loved watching that
And
show.
then we had the meeting at the Anonymous people showing too, and all that. So I'd love to hear that story, how that unfolded. All from
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that because like you said, important in that this stigma that goes with this disease of alcoholism and addiction is so hard to overcome.
Yeah.
So when I had this opportunity, it's a show called Undercover Boss.
Yeah.
It's still on CBS, I believe. This show is still running, but this
Yeah.
was in 2010. The company I worked for, I was in corporate America for 4 decades, and at least until January. So, and all of that corporate America was with a company called Subway, which when I joined was a little tiny sandwich chain, and then grew into 40,000 plus locations around the globe. And I was the development guy, so that was something that was a very exciting,
Successful career, I would say.
It was a great career. It was wonderful, and the thing was, the folks from Studio Lambert, who produce Undercover Boss, came to our CMO, our marketing guy, and said, hey, gee, we want to have they had done some smaller companies. We want to have a company that's a little bit more well known. We're picking Subway. Would you like to be on the show? So I happened to be at a meeting where I'm sitting with our founder and CEO, Fred DeLuca, who started Subway in Bridgeport, Connecticut, when he was 17 years old in 1965. So I'm there with Fred at this meeting, and the marketing guy, Tony, speaks to Fred and says, they want us to be on this Undercover Boss show. I'm not sure if we should go on it, because you never know what they're going to reveal, but it'd probably be a good idea, because typically people feel good after they watch the show, and there'll be some people featured, and it'll be good for the brand. And Fred, who would always rub his chin, started rubbing his chin, and he said, well, I don't know. I've seen the show. You have to be on the show, right? I don't want to go on the show. Everybody will know me. Why don't you have Don do it? And so Tony turns to me and said, so you want to be on Undercover Boss? And I said, sure, what do I have to do?
All right.
And next thing you know, I'm being interviewed, and we go through a process. And next thing you know, you got a camera crew following you around. But they want to know the story behind the company and the story behind the people. So the people that the CEO or whoever, in my case I was the chief development officer, that the executive works with, they want to know those stories. They want to know the executive story. So when I was being interviewed, in the back of my mind, I said, well, should I share my recovery. And it dawned on me, why not? People should know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it came out, and I shared about having a meltdown at work, and when I threw a jelly donut against the wall, and and the next thing I know, I'm in rehab. And then they kind of explored my my music career, and like the whole, they showed crazy pictures of me when I was in the band, and I shared my addiction, alcoholism, and recovery story. And what happened was, then the thing airs, and they include a segment on that. And there was this guy named Harold Andrew, and he was in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And Harold, as he tells it, he was watching the show the night it aired, and he was 2 weeks clean and sober, but he was very shaky, and he had been rejected from a job. He had no prospects for employment. He had 2 felonies on his record because of his drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sitting alone in his apartment, and he's thinking about going out to the package store and getting a 6-pack. And as he's thinking about this, the TV's on, and there's me, and I'm talking about being in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
For a number of years. And all of a sudden he starts paying attention. And holy, wait a minute. If this guy is in recovery and he got to where he is in this company,
Mm-hmm.
I should be able to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave him hope.
Wow.
The next day, after the thing was over, I had a number of folks reaching out to me, including the Phoenix. Scott Strode, his brother, reached out to me and said, gee, you're in recovery and you're good at helping companies to grow. Do you think you could help us to grow? And so I flew out to Denver and met with those guys, and now I'm on the board.
All right.
But this fellow Harold, he emailed me, and I'm not even sure how he got my email address, but this email shows up, and he just explains what I just explained to you. And he said, I don't want anything from you. I just want to say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so moved by that. And I realized, just because I had shared that I was in recovery and done it on national television without stigma, without, this is what recovery looks like, folks, that it impacted this one guy and helped him stay sober another day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sent him a message back saying, thank you very much. Fast forward 2 years later, 2 things happened at the same time. Number one, Studio Lambert called and said, we're doing an episode of Undercover Boss called Epic Bosses. We want to know what happened, where are they now and what happened.
Right.
So they said, has anything happened as a result of you being an undercover boss? I told them about Harold.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, our friend Greg Williams,
Yeah.
who is a wonderful young man in recovery and also a great documentary filmmaker, and and a very active and very high profile in the recovery community here in Connecticut and now nationally. He was doing a film called The Anonymous People. And he interviewed me for that film because of the, overcoming the stigma, right? And I shared the story of Harold. And what happened was, Greg and his film crew went out on the road and they found Harold in Indiana.
Wow.
And they interviewed Harold. And they made a segment in the film, or actually in the, sort of the outtakes, but there was a whole segment on Don and Harold, or Harold and Don.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, and there's Harold and there's me, we're both reading the email, and it was very powerful. But at the same time, the folks at Studio Lambert, Undercover Boss, wanted me to meet Harold it just so happened they flew Harold up to Hartford, to Bushnell Park, right down the street where you do the recovery walks.
Yeah.
They brought Harold to Bushnell Park, and they drove me up to Bushnell Park, and they had me meet Harold on screen for the first time. And Harold and I hugged and cried, and was, and it was like, now he had been sober 2 years, right? This is 2 years down the road. And then the last thing they filmed was right there at the Bushnell. They were holding the premiere of The Anonymous People,
Wow.
featuring that Harold and Don segment. And the last thing they filmed was us going into the premiere of The Anonymous People. And the next thing that happened was Harold and I came out on stage right at the beginning of the premiere of The Anonymous People, and shared our story, and then they showed the clip, or they showed the clip and then we came out. I forget which way it worked, but it all came together. And that's something that I found. I'm glad you brought that up, because now that I think about it, it's one of those many coincidences or God incidences or whatever we want to call them, the coincidences that are not coincidences, or the coincidences in which God chooses to remain anonymous, that everything fell into place. I mean, we're talking about two major events all happening at one time that just lined up perfectly. That, and I've seen that so many times in my life, where things have lined up well beyond anything I ever could have planned, and it turned out so much better. And that's the power of recovery. That's the power of spirituality and being plugged into whatever our higher power is, this sort of spirit of the universe that I can feel working right in here. And how when we share our stories, what that power is. And I look at CCAR and the sharing of stories, like watching some of the stories that folks have shared. When we connect with each other like that, what could be more beautiful? And we save each other's lives. That was an opportunity where Harold, he didn't go out to the package store. He stayed and watched the show, and now it's 11 years later. We filmed that in 2010, and Harold's still sober today. He and I are Facebook friends.
Cool.
And that continual sharing and that continual opportunity to connect with each other, and that spirit that binds us all together, I found that through my recovery, through in my case, a 12-step program, but people find it coming in through the Phoenix, coming in through CCAR, recovery coaching. All these things all tie together to help us find a life in recovery beyond our wildest dreams.
You talk about those events, and I discerned that you were kind of reaching back to see what that was like and remember it. And CCAR hosted that showing of the Anonymous People at the Bushnell, and I sometimes forget the role that CCAR's had or I've had, and it's really about trying to do the best I can each day, not really looking in the past, or I believe the best is yet to come in the future. But I try to be very present in the day and do my best each day. That's what recovery taught me. And then when you have an opportunity to look back and reflect a little bit, you go, dang, how did all that happen? Because Sandy and I have had, I don't know, how many years now? 28 years married, 30 years together, 4 children, and all the highlights we've had in our life. I mean, when you look at your 30 plus years of recovery, what were some of the things that you're so grateful for? Some of your huge highlights in that time.
It's hard to. There's so many. That's just it.
Right.
It's like I think you hit it right when you said you just try to be in today.
Yeah.
And today is like, here's a highlight right here. I get to be on the podcast and share with the two of
The
you.
highlights for us.
And this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the Undercover Boss thing, and just playing music again. I have a wonderful wife. I've been married and divorced in sobriety, and my first wife and I are very good friends. We have coffee together now and then, and chat about. She's got 2 kids. I have 2 kids now, but because I was taught in the program not to burn bridges, we stayed friends, and that's a wonderful thing. And then I got married the second time, and my current wife.
That's one of Phil's phrases, so it's okay. I get it.
My wife said, "Look, I know you're old." I was 44 at the time. I know you're old, but I want to have kids.
Wow,
She's a lot younger than I am. That's a whole story in itself. But I had to agree to have kids, and I've gone through life. I don't need or want kids. And she talked me into having kids, and I am so blessed today to have 2 wonderful kids. My son just graduated from University of South Carolina, and he's doing an internship and doing some good stuff. My daughter is a junior at James Madison in Virginia. She's pursuing nursing. She's going for APRN. So I love these kids. I can't even describe that spiritual connection. Talk about a spiritual experience like we were sharing at my home the other night. That first time I held my son in my arms, and the first time I saw my daughter appear, just come into the world, and realize it was my daughter. And it was, we had a name we only had a girl name. We didn't have a boy name, and we didn't know what because we already had a boy, and we didn't know what she was, what it was going to be. But out she came, and I said, "It's Caroline," because that was the name that we had already picked.
Right.
So Caroline arrived. So my son Dawson, my daughter Caroline, my wife Betsy, I am blessed so many times over. The wonderful friends I have today, the connection that we have with the friends that I have. Scott Strode is one of those friends that I've gotten very close to. It's one thing after another, one blessing, for want of a better word, but that's a great word, one blessing after another that recovery has given me, as long as I stay away from a drink or a drug today.
Yeah, I agree. What are your highlights? If you're going to pick some over the last course of your recovery.
Wow. Well, obviously I've always wanted to be a mother, so the 4 kids that we had, we renegotiated in the middle, so and when I burned out of a corporate career, I just basically burned out after 33 years. And within 5 months, I'm working with students in recovery on a college campus. And I'm applying all the principles of recovery for my own situation at the time while I'm teaching and supporting others in it. It can only be a God thing or magic moment, recovery magic working in my life. And then at a time where Phil and I had spent decades just working and running kids around, reconnecting and having these things in common, now working in recovery together has been amazing. And then through my stepdaughter, through Phil's oldest daughter, grandchildren has met all the promises that I've been told being a grandparent would bring. and being able to sit back and laugh a little bit at the trouble they give their parents.
Mm-hmm. I think it's simple for me, but really, simple does not mean shallow, as my sponsor, which we talked about. You've actually been at retreats with him before, but he'd always say simple does not mean shallow. But obviously the greatest blessing to me, and I owe it all to my relationship with the higher power, with God, is the family, with union with Sandy and the family we have together. It's the career. It's the meaningful work that I've seen. I can't even believe that I've been here 22 plus years, and the things that have happened and what we've been able to do, and the people that have been reached through the team here is just humbling in a lot of ways, that I would even be a part of that. And I've also had the opportunity to have some adventures and that I never would have ever dreamed of. If I was still actively using, I couldn't have hiked 2,189 miles on the Appalachian Trail, had the support of my wife and kids, and how much they still talk about it and what it means. And so I think about the big book of AA, I know talks about the promises, right? And I used to sit in meetings and listen to those promises and think absolutely none of them would come true. The last one being like, fear of financial insecurity will leave you. I'm like, F you, that ain't ever gonna happen. Are you kidding me right now? I mean, I had like 17 cents in my pocket and I never thought. And then somewhere down the road, listening to the promises, and I'm going, check, 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 check. And they went through the whole list and they had all come true. And it's gotten even better from there. I didn't even know how that happened.
That's awesome, Phil. And it's the promises. I think because it starts with that. God will realize that God's doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, and there are a number of things in there. But it starts with, we will know a new freedom and a new happiness. That starts almost immediately.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as we get free from this substance that controlled us for so long, that new freedom, we get that right away.
Yeah.
And boy, there's a lot of happiness in that, being free of King Alcohol, denizens of his mad realm, or or free of whatever substance it was.
Right.
The stuff, the cocaine I used to snort up my nose, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And we're again connected in all that. In fact, I feel connected to you often, Phil, and I've mentioned this to you before, but I like to hike, and because my kids are down south, and we travel around and we hike wherever we go. I can't tell you how many different states I've crossed the Appalachian Trail, and every time I do, I think of Phil. And I've sent you pictures, right? Of several times.
Well, maybe I should apologize for that.
No, it's a wonderful thing. Because
Phil had walked across here.
Phil was here.
I was at one time. Yeah. The whole thing about the trail is I'm still amazed that I did it just as much as anyone, just because it was. I just look back on it. I'm so glad I had the opportunity. What a blessing. And that's really what we've talked about, is a lot about the blessings of recovery, the introduction of music, and some incredible stories and outcomes of just trying to live one day at a time in recovery. Is there anything you want to talk about with the Phoenix, or anything else you'd want people to know about recovery and your journey, or anything?
Well, I think the Phoenix, I think about recovery itself and this disease that we have of alcoholism addiction, mind, body, spirit. And Phoenix tends to focus, at least initially, on that the body part, right? The physical piece, in that you have 48 hours of clean time, you can come to a workout, you can come to a meditation, you can come to a yoga class. And you can do it virtually online now. We've got virtual programming, which was wonderful. That was one of the things my sponsor said to me. He said this to me off and on over the years, but the first, when COVID was first happening, the pandemic and the isolation was starting, he said, look for the good that comes out of this.
Right.
And one of the good things was Phoenix very quickly pivoted to this thing that we had on the calendar for 2022, which was virtual programming.
Yeah,
Next thing you know, we're all virtual programming, but the team really got that off the ground, and it's out there. So just go to thephoenix.org and check out our virtual programming, and you can do a number of things there. But, the thing with the Phoenix is, watching the growth and watching the evolution, and we're in Connecticut now.
Yeah.
And as chairman of the board of the Phoenix, I was like, I've been chairman now for over a year, and we're not in Connecticut yet. And we started in Denver, and I was so grateful that we have a great person, Sydney Durand, who handles the Northeast, and she kind of oversees a big part of the country, and she hired a wonderful program coordinator named Lee Stepanian. And Lee, she's done a wonderful job putting things together, and connected with CCAR too. We've been doing some things together, and now we have events happening right here in Hartford.
There we go.
And we've had some stuff in New Haven, and we're going to have some stuff all over the state. So we're really getting underway here in Connecticut. And for me, that feels so good to watch Phoenix grow, because it provides that opportunity for folks to go in and start addressing their physical health, especially in early sobriety. But at the same time, and more importantly, they get connected to a sober, active community. And I know I keep harping on this connection thing, but it's that connection that I believe makes 12-step programs work. I believe it's the connection that makes the Phoenix work. I believe it's the connection that makes CCAR work. That, as we connect with each other, you get two people together. I connected with Harold through a screen, through a TV screen, but we connected, and it worked. And he stayed sober another day, and now he's got 11 years under his belt. So the Phoenix begins those connections. And as we branch out into music and into other things, I think it's going to be a wonderful place for folks to go in order to expand their recovery, continue their recovery, and interact with all the other wonderful organizations out there. And I'm very excited about our partnership with CCAR, because I think we can do a lot of great things together.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see how we can go help more people.
Exactly.
Or give them opportunities to help themselves, too.
That's what it's all about.
How you doing, dear?
Good.
Do you still wish I wore a Hawaiian shirt?
No.
I don't wish I wore a Hawaiian shirt.
I didn't say I wish you wore it. I said you would have not looked good with Don here.
I enjoyed your lime in the coconut shirt.
Oh,
me too. I love that
rough.
shirt. That's a great song.
It's not my favorite. The parrot one is my favorite.
It's a great song, though. The lime and the coconut. Do you want me to sing it again?
No.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you,
Thank
Don.
you, Phil. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.